Welcome in, everyone, to the Voice of College Football, and more specifically, the one, every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. But we run into scheduling conflicts at times. That's why it's important for you to subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Why is the show called The One? Well, it's one major college football topic each and every week between myself, Mark Rogers, and our illustrious guest. We don't even want to call him a guest at this point. He's practically family, maybe in a dysfunctional way, but Steve Day's Michigan Podcast and the Bigger 10. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
Doing just fine. And again, Steve and I go toe-to-toe. Sometimes we agree. Sometimes we disagree. You can bank on this. It's always from the head, from the heart, authentic on both sides. This should be a good one, and we probably don't agree on this one. Michigan, Ohio State, better program, not today, but all time. Ohio State's had the better program and the better team for quite some time. Michigan has had the better team, certainly, and possibly the better program over the last 2 years. But all time, Steve, where do you stand?
Well, if we're going all time, and I mean, I feel like this is a very difficult question because you're essentially asking me, what Escalade do I like better? Okay. But I'm going to go with Michigan, but probably not for the reasons that you think. I think that that Michigan, if we're going all time, Michigan is, if I just stacked it up with strictly probably the metrics you're going to look at, All-Americans, Heisman Trophy winners, Big Ten championships, they're going to be fairly similar. Michigan's going to have more consensus All-Americans. Michigan's going to have more Big Ten championships. Ohio State's going to have more national championships that actually matter. You know, a lot of Michigans are going to be pre-World War II. Ohio State's never really, post-World War II, post-Woody Hayes, I should say, his arrival is the only program that's had no form of a down period. They've had a disappointing year here and there, but no down period. Michigan had been in that group for the longest time, and hello, Rich Rod. So that changed. Okay, so there's a lot of compelling reasons to choose Ohio State. But when you look at the historical importance of the Michigan football program, okay, you're talking about the first football program that not only was successful, but mattered outside of the original 13 colonies. Michigan is basically the Northwest Ordinance of college football programs. Michigan literally taught Notre Dame how to play football, which is the most important and historically great program of all time is Notre Dame, probably. We literally taught them the sport. Michigan basically brought the sport to what was at that time the West. We didn't have transcontinental railroads. At least that was kind of new. We didn't have plane travel. And so that's where the lyrics, Champions of the West and the Victors, that was written, I think, in 1898. That's where those lyrics come from. That was the West, like the Northwest Ordinance, post, the ratification of the Constitution and the establishment of the Union. Michigan created two-platoon football via Fritz Chrysler in college football. Notre Dame is often credited with and Knute Rockne as a player with the advent of the forward pass, but really that goes back to Fritz, or not to Fritz Chrysler, but to Fielding Yost's last great teams and a legendary passing combo that he had in those days, involving Benny Oosterbaan in the 1930s. The modern football helmet, as we know it, basically came into being from Fritz Chrysler at Michigan. The biggest stadium that's ever been built in college football, Michigan built that. Notre Dame Stadium is an exact replica miniature. Rockne designed it as a replica miniature of what Fielding Yost built at Michigan. Michigan's teams at the turn of the 20th century, the point-a-minute squads under Fielding H. Yost, those were really the first college football teams to ever capture the media or national attention in the entire history of the sport. All right. So when you look at those aspects, when you look at the historical significance, Michigan commissioned Ohio Stadium. They played the dedication game at Ohio Stadium as well. Michigan's basically the reason the Big Ten Conference exists. They essentially founded it. When you look at those historical benchmarks, it's really difficult, I think, to split the two from an achievement standpoint. We're talking about two of the five greatest programs of all time. I think Ohio State has now become number one, I want to say, in win percentage. Michigan held that title for a long time. Again, looking at you, Rich Rod. Michigan is still, I think, top three in that stat, but still leads in all-time wins. But I think Ohio State's top three, I think, in that stat. I mean, it's really hard. Ohio State's had more Heisman Trophy winners. Like I said, they've had more what I would call legit national championships for the modern era. But there's other historical achievements that are in Michigan's favor, too, including the better record in the rivalry, the more Big Ten championships. I just think you could cut that either way. So looking for a definitive metric, Michigan is the most historically important program in the sport outside of Amos Alonzo Stagg in Chicago, which doesn't exist anymore, and the Ivy League programs. They basically established and exported the sport of college football outside of elite Ivy League universities and to the country at large. And so I think that's going to be the tiebreaker for me in choosing the Wolverines.
Folks, we welcome your sponsored comments and questions in the live chat. And Steve, I've got to say that I anticipated your approach. And you also anticipated my approach, that I was going to lean on records and national championships and winning percentage and recent success. I thought that I actually anticipated a more flowery soliloquy about, bright autumn afternoons, at the big house and, hail to the victors ringing true and such things. But very well stated and very much a historical perspective and a lesson for many of us in the formation of Big Ten football and collegiate football across the country. I'm, of course, serving this up because it is a legitimate debate or discussion. In no way, for as much as Ohio State fans may want me to trash the last 20 years of Michigan football and really lean on these games and these years being more relevant, there is certainly an argument there that the closer we get to the current date, the more relevant and meaningful the championships are and the games are. Of course, I'm going to start first and foremost with one thing that can't be debated, and that's the winning and losing of football games. And again, Ohio State has just recently edged out Alabama, and before that, just in the last few years, Michigan for the best winning percentage of all time. I would also say that if you put the Big Ten championships and the series into perspective, understanding that Ohio State did not join the Big Ten until 1912, and Michigan won, I believe, the first 13 games between Ohio State and Michigan. Then Ohio State, if you take off, you don't take off those games. So I want to stand clear of folks that I get into discussions with on a regular basis that want to completely discard games played in the 1800s or a particular time before World War II. We all have our threshold of what we consider meaningful, and to start to draw the line in the sand is impossible. You cannot designate a year in which college football or any sport becomes meaningful or relevant. It's impossible to do. Therefore, they all count, all the championships, all the national championships, because that was the mode of declaring a national champion at the time, count to a certain extent. But more so than anything, winning football games, losing football games, and certainly Ohio State just edges out Michigan at this point because of recent success in winning percentage. But you can take any time frame as well. You can look at the last 10 years of college football. I believe Ohio State would be number 2 to Alabama in winning percentage. If you go the last 20 years, the last 50 years, the last 70 years, Ohio State's going to be number 1 in winning percentage. They have certainly had their disappointments in postseason play, but I think overall, and certainly more recently, been more successful than Michigan in postseason play as well. If we go through hardware, and again, I hate to lean on hardware because it's not objective. It's voted on by people, but it is prestigious when you go through the various position awards on both sides of the football, and of course the Heisman Trophy, and it's extremely close. You're telling me that Michigan has more awards than Ohio State?
More consensus All-Americans.
Yes.
Yeah.
That I've not added up recently. I did do an all-time rankings just a couple off seasons ago. So Michigan with more consensus All-Americans, Ohio State with a better overall AP ranking if you count up points year to year. But again, it's extremely close, and they're both in the top 4 to 5. And again, I'm going to lean on Ohio State more recently. Some people would discard producing NFL talent. Others, again, would emphasize NFL talent. If you're on the Ohio State side, you want to emphasize producing number 1 NFL draft picks and overall selections, where Ohio State now ranks, I believe, number 1 in first round picks and number 3 in NFL draft selections. And if we want to go to the more historical, Script Ohio is, of course, legendary and historic in and of itself. Ohio State and Michigan. Your most cherished memories of this game? Let's go in that direction.
I think for me, it really, you got to remember, I didn't grow up as a youngster. I didn't move to Michigan until I was in the 5th grade. And so I was looking for a college football team or a football team to adopt. We moved. I had lived the last few years in Florida, and sometimes, it's still very warm even in the fall. And so I'd come in and look for something to watch if it got too hot outside, to hang out with my buddies. And I got huge into the NFL, and watching a ton of NFL games there. And then we moved briefly to Syracuse, New York. And then in the fall of 1983, late in the fall of 1983, we moved back to Michigan, where my stepdad was raised and he was born. And I was just, that first weekend we were there, we moved to the weekend before Thanksgiving. And I'm just searching on TV. It's cold. There's not much you can do outside. I don't know anybody in the neighborhood yet, and I was looking for a football game on a Saturday. And there is Richard Rogers and Steve Smith against Mike Tomczak and Keith Byers at the Big House. And it was 1983, the Michigan-Ohio State game. And that was the game. I mean, I just fell in love with the stadium, the uniforms, the victors. It's funny, we're having this conversation and I'm wearing a red flannel. So there you go. But right, I'm red, I'm scarlet, you're gray. But that was my indoctrination, or really my baptism into it. The next year, Michigan was not very good. That was the 6-6 year under Bo, but Detroit Tiger baseball, and I was a huge baseball fan as a kid too. And I watched every game that was on TV. I'd stay up at night, wait for my parents to go to bed, sneak up and turn on WDIV in Detroit and watch the games in Seattle at 10:30 Eastern. The '84 Tigers, were an incredible season. I can still to this day name the entire starting lineup, 1 through 9 in order. But Michigan football for me picked back up again the next year in '85. That team that started unranked and ended number 2 in the country. And I remember being at the skating rink. Yeah, it was the '80s. I remember being in the skating rink for the '85 Michigan and Ohio State game, and all my buddies want to go skate, and I'm sitting there on by the TV watching that game. That was the game where Harbaugh got knocked out. Well, he'd have been called concussed these days. Now back then it was called getting your bell rung. And he hit that 78-yard touchdown pass that ended up winning that football game. And then the '86 game, which to this day is one of my all-time favorite Michigan Ohio State games. You have a chance to go on YouTube and watch the original broadcast. I would recommend it. The CBS really put in, particularly for that day and age, really amped the production value. There's a phenomenal intro with the Rocky theme where Brett Musburger introduces the two programs, and Bo Schembechler and Earl Bruce, and Michigan falls down 14-3, I think it was. Chris Carter had a couple of touchdowns, and there's a huge comeback. And it wasn't really Harbaugh leading the comeback; it was Jamie Morris. And I remember him like it was yesterday, trucking Chris Spielman, who was like my all-time favorite Detroit Lion. Okay, I mean that game was incredible. Came down to a field goal at the end. Ohio State missed it. Bo gets carried off the field, and that was now I'm fully immersed emotionally in this pretty much at this time forward for the rest of my life. the 97 game, of course, Michigan's number 1, Ohio State's number 4. Can Ohio State do to Michigan what Michigan had done to Ohio State the previous couple of years and spoiling an undefeated season? The 03 game really stands out to me. That's the last time Keith Jackson called the Michigan-Ohio State game. It was the 100th iteration of the rivalry there. Ohio State defending national champions. And that was the game that basically won Chris Perry the Doak Walker Award. That's a game that stands out a lot to me. The 91 game, I remember at my buddy Rick O'Connor's house, we were all playing our Super Tecmo seasons against each other over Thanksgiving break. We all stopped to watch the Michigan-Ohio State game. Desmond strikes the pose. So, I mean, in short, a lot. One of the ones though that I'll never forget was 88. And I have no idea why this happened. My JV basketball coach scheduled a basketball practice and kept us over for Saturday morning. And we're all pissed. We want to go home and watch the Michigan-Ohio State game, So get home, and there was a break during practice, and I checked the score, and Michigan's up 20-0. And I'm like, oh, okay, we good, So we get done with practice. I race home. And all of a sudden, like, Ohio State's ahead. I'm like, what in the hell happened here? Okay. And John Colasar, for those of us that remember the 80s, he was a Buckeye freaking killer, man. A Buckeye killer. And they kick off, the Ohio State takes the lead. This was, I think, Cooper's first year, I want to say.
Yes.
Ohio State takes the lead, and Colasar returns the kickoff nearly to midfield. Like 2 plays later, he mosses 2 Ohio State guys in the end zone. He was like a 5'9" white dude. He mosses 2 Ohio State guys in the infield or in the end zone for the go-ahead touchdown. Okay. And did all that. He was the entire drive to win that game, So that game has always stuck out to me just because I remember being at basketball practice and I'm like, oh, we got this. I get home and we're like, lose it. Okay. And then like Colasar, just basically, went full last son of Krypton and won that game at the end. So quite a few. Usually the ones we win are the ones I remember the most, obviously.
Steve, of course, the two of us could go on for hours and hours reliving Ohio State Michigan games through the years. That particular game, I remember responding to a caller just a few months ago, and they couldn't believe that 4-win Ohio State team that almost upset Michigan on its way to the Rose Bowl, that losing that game after they came back from 20-0 to take a 28-20 lead hurt me more than losing college football playoff games do today. Like, it was that gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
It was that meaningful
to
play Michigan, regardless. When they say throw out the records, I say throw out that cliche most of the time regarding other games. When it involves this game, especially in that era, absolutely throw out the records. You bring up the 83 game. What's interesting, or what's unusual about that game for me, was that's the only Ohio State Michigan game in my fandom lifetime of being a fan that I could not watch the game.
It wasn't on network TV, and I didn't know that at the time. So a couple of years ago, Mark, I tried to go online. There's a guy I know that used to be a producer for ABC and has access to a lot of the old Michigan games, the original broadcasts. And so I wanted to get that game because it was my first one. And he sent it to, and I bought it from him. It wasn't until he sent me the DVD and I put it in my DVD player that we don't even have those anymore. But it wasn't until I watched the DVD that I realized, wait a minute, this was like a local Detroit feed with Jim Brandstatter doing color. This wasn't like, Chris Schenkel or Keith Jackson doing the game. I had no idea that it wasn't even on network television back then.
Yeah, I was pulling my hair out. I'm 15 years old at the time, and I can't watch Ohio State, Michigan. I live in Akron, Ohio, and they're 2 top 10 teams. The Big Ten championship was off the table, but the winner went to the Sugar Bowl, Michigan against Auburn, the loser to the Fiesta. And I just couldn't believe it. Of course, I hung on every call on the radio. 1981, I tend to really get beat.
Yeah, I know you're an Arch Leicester guy.
Yeah. I'm a big Arch Leicester guy. He's the only guy that I own a specific signed jersey from, Arch Leicester. And Yeah, he was my guy. And I woke up that morning and I got the weather report and knew it was going to just be icy and cold and like 16 degrees at Michigan. And for some reason, I looked out the window, I got the weather report, and just 13-9 hit me. And I go, Ohio State's going to pull off this upset 13-9. They were a 10-point underdog. Anthony Carter brings the opening kickoff to midfield. And I'm thinking, uh-oh. But yeah, Schleicher runs it into the end zone, like gets pushed into a snow stack in the corner of the end zone with about 2 minutes left, and they win 14-9 and tie for a Big Ten championship that year. My first memory of Ohio State, Michigan, actually, Steve, is, and there had to be Ohio State, Michigan, and college football viewing before this, but it's out of my memory because my first memory of the game is watching Bo Schembechler carried off the field in 1976 in Columbus.
22-0. Yeah.
And something caused me to just like raise my fist and shake it at the TV screen about as close as I could get it to the TV screen. I was so infuriated at that man.
You want to hear something that's just you? I mean, you want to talk about eerie or Twilight Zone stuff. So it was Bo's 7th season at Michigan. It took him 7 years to go to Columbus and win a game, and he won by 22 points. Okay. In his 7th game against Ohio State, Jim Harbaugh finally won in Columbus, and he won by 22 points. How about them apples? That's kind of odd.
That is odd. That is very odd. We'll take a couple sponsored questions and comments here. We appreciate it, folks. Steve Dace Burner. Did you know that they existed out there, Steve?
I didn't, but what's kind of funny is I listen to other Michigan podcasts because I want to get as far away from my day job as I can when I'm not doing it, so it doesn't rot my soul, basically. And so I listen to a lot of sports betting and Michigan podcasts of their Michigan outlets, other than Michigan podcasts, like the Wolverine and Michigan Insider and stuff. And it's funny now when they do super chat questions, some guy named Steve Deese's burner account keeps showing up on all these other Michigan podcasts. It's not me. Just so you know, it's not me. It's not me.
There's somebody out there that makes up an account, and I think they switch it every couple of weeks and take another embarrassing pose from me and post it as the profile pic. But here we go from our buddy Steve. Are we beginning to see Michigan make a run in the rivalry? Also, please in the chat, don't forget to check out Bigger 10 with Steve, absolutely, and his co-host, but never partner, Aaron McIntyre, who is a literal vampire. Thanks, guys.
The lighting does make Aaron look like the undead. That is very true. But that could happen. That's what makes the 10-year war so unique. If you look at the history of this rivalry, it has not been historically, other than the 10-year war, it has not been much of a back and forth affair. It has been an affair of momentum swings. Traditionally, I think that's on top of the personal relationship between the two. And for everybody within the sound of my voice, if you have never read the chapter in Bo's autobiography, Bo, the chapter that he writes about the 10-year war, if you have never read that, don't let another day go by, man, if you love college football, that you don't find a way to get a copy of that book and read that chapter. It just will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, man. It's just incredible. Okay. But the history, as you know, Mark, of this rivalry has been swings, 4 or 5 in a row in one place, 7, 8 in a row in another, right? A period of dominance on one side, followed by a period of dominance on the other. Ohio State is coming out of the biggest period of dominance we've had in this rivalry, with the exception of going back to its advent in the years before Ohio State was even in the Big Ten, as you pointed out. The 10-year war between Woody and Bo is the one exception there. But even that had swings, remember. Yeah, Michigan had the first upset there in 69, but didn't win the game again until they won it once, until between 69 and 76. Ohio State came back and still exerted control. And then the 10-year war ended with Michigan winning the last 3 and not giving up an offensive touchdown in any of those games. So even within that 10-year war that Michigan won, it was 5-4-1. But even within that, there were swings back and forth. Okay, so it's not been two guys at the two heavyweight champions in the center of the ring at the same time at their peak, lobbing haymakers. It's not been like that. Jerry DiNardo's kind of predicted last year that he could, looking at the talent, he said that both teams had in their programs for this and future years. He thought that this might be the first time that we see the two of them just kind of go back and forth, slugging it out as equals. That has not happened a lot in the rivalry.
Bo and Earl had a pretty good 9-year run as well. Earl Bruce 5, Bo Schembechler 4.
Yeah, Bo even kidded when Earl got, erroneously fired there. Bo even kidded, hey, I'm about to become the AD at Michigan. Maybe I'll just go ahead and retire from coaching and hire Earl to coach the team. He even joked about that at the time. Yeah.
David Greenshield, thank you so much for the contribution. We appreciate it. Steve, is it fair to say the 1969 win over Ohio State was the most important win in the history of the team up north? Bo called that his greatest victory, Woody's best team.
No, that's not the most important win. It certainly is on the list, and it certainly was Bo's most important win. It established his program, and that's how the chapter of the 10-year war in Bo's book ends. He talks about a reunion of that 69 team that Bo went to, a 10-year reunion of it in 1979. And after Woody had, well, actually, they did fire him, if I remember right. Didn't he did get fired after the Gator Bowl, right? Okay.
Yes.
So this is a reunion in 79 of that 69 team. And Bo is one of the MCs or one of the guest speakers of the event. And Woody, he's called to introduce Woody to the dais. And Woody gets up to speak, and he goes off about how that 69 team was the best team he ever had. And he waxes poetic about it. Then he glares down the podium at Bo. He says, "Damn you, Bo. You'll never win a bigger game than that one." It's not the most important win in Michigan history. It's probably in the top 10, 15. But it was absolutely the most important win for Bo. It established his program and kind of established what the next 30-year paradigm of Michigan football would be, from Bo to Mo to Lloyd. So for that, maybe I'm underestimating it, putting in the top 10. Maybe it's top 5 or 6 then at that point.
Connor, we will let you know. The one topic is seemingly always going to come back to Ohio State and Michigan. Yes, we do favor those two schools and those two programs because of the two of our fandoms. But this is all about college football, and we are simply taking suggestions from all of you. So you dictate what the big topic is each and every week. We will go to any part of the country, any conference, any narrative. Ohio State and Michigan. So, Steve, when you look at the Wolverines right now and versus Ohio State and look into the future and this 12-team playoff, is this going to, of course, it's not going to destroy the rivalry, but we were talking on our Ohio State live show today that it could turn what used to be an all-encompassing game that dictated your value and your success that particular season into a situation where you have the opportunity, like Ohio State almost had this year, had they taken advantage of it, to bounce back in the playoffs, especially with the 12-team format.
It's still going to be, I think what is likely to happen, Mark, is it's going to be sort of the Duke, North Carolina of college football. It'll still be the biggest and most important rivalry in the sport, depending on how you view Army, Navy, and obviously its cultural impact and significance, on an institutional level. Okay. But at the same time, it will never lose its luster. It will lose some of that cataclysmic significance because of what is about to happen. And that's the same with Duke, North Carolina basketball. Okay. But if you go back to 2 years ago when Michigan finally broke the streak, if you game plan out the 12-team college football playoff, well, first of all, Michigan and Ohio State would have just played the very next week in the Big Ten championship game without divisions, which is coming in 24. And then if you look at if let's say Ohio State were to win that rematch, it is very likely the way that the 12-team playoff would have been structured that Michigan and Ohio State would have been they wouldn't have played the very next game in the playoff, but they'd have been in the same subgroup in the playoff, meaning they might have played each other in a second game. So I think we're probably looking at several years now where they're going to play twice, 3 times. And that's going to be the same for Penn State and Michigan and Penn State, Ohio State and USC and Michigan and USC, Ohio State. And that's what goes on in basketball. But I don't think anybody thinks that Duke and North Carolina has lost its significance as the best rivalry in college basketball. So this won't lose that either. But will it lose the cataclysmic life is over, shake my fist, little Mark Rogers, fighting acne at the screen, shaking his fist, okay, at those dreaded Wolverines and inducing a long winter of discontent? I don't know that it will do that anymore in the new environment. So the importance and significance will be there. The level of cataclysmic hatred that comes along with the loss may not, unless that loss happens in the playoff. Then it returns.
Steve, when I hear out there on social media and otherwise that particular fan base, this fan base is delusional, this fan base is this fan base is that, I typically play the contrarian and bring it back to center and balance it out to say every fan base has its various factions of sanity and insanity. Do you think there is, though, a characteristic of Ohio State fan versus characteristic of typical Michigan fan?
Yes. And I see it a lot because of what I do for a living. And because of what I do for a living, and the positions I take within that living, I am culturally more aligned with your fan base than my own. Okay. So I see both sides of it. All right. So there is definitely a jihadic almost fanaticism within a certain segment of your fan base. That's how a Michigan fan would describe it. I think an Ohio State fan would describe it as conviction and zeal. Okay. And then there is a certain, no question, an elitist sneering faction within the Michigan fan base, that Michigan, that faction would not define as elitist sneering, but more enlightened panache. And I do think that is true. Twitter doesn't make it as true as it used to be, because everybody gets their sneering, elitist, fanaticism, jihadic, douche-tasticness on with Twitter. And so if that is your plug-in point for fan bases, you may not think that those characteristics exist anymore because you see them comprehensively. But outside of Twitter, which isn't the real world, outside of Twitter, some of those things exist. I don't know that they exist to the way that they used to, I mean, during COVID, for example, in my day job, when I was fighting to have some form of a normal country and working publicly and privately, as you know, behind the scenes, trying to help the college football season happen. I had some prominent Ohio State alums, coaches, follow me and stuff on Twitter, and I was, at the same time, I was often fighting the president of my own university, Mark Schlissel, in that pursuit, So I get both sides of that argument, because I'm culturally probably more of a match for your ecosystem, for your program than the team I'm a fan of. And so I understand a little bit where you guys are coming from about my own people, but you just need to remember, those are still my own people, not yours. Okay.
Taking that cultural slant out of it and going strictly with fanaticism, can you imagine Michigan dominating this series as Ohio State did between 2003 or 4 in that range to just a few years ago, and continuing to push this game as the end all be all on campus, Xing out ends, clock, countdown to the game?
No, Michigan would do the opposite. Michigan would think, let's really get under these guys' skin and minimize the game. Yeah, whatever. It's a cute little affair we're going to play here. Thanksgiving weekend, get that out of the way, check that box, and let's go ahead and move on. And I got to be that part I kind of dig. I kind of dig the idea of you ain't worth the salt in my tears kind of troll, Michigan would go that way. Like Michigan would paint stuff red on campus, would plaster the word Ohio so it lost its meaning and potency. Michigan would go the other way. Yeah.
Steve, we appreciate you doing this each and every week. Again, better program, Ohio State, Michigan. It's a close call. Steve goes Michigan. I go Ohio State. Surprise, surprise. Catch Steve on Michigan Podcast and also the Bigger 10. Anything in particular you guys are working on over there?
Next week, we're going to unveil my first team total talent ratings post recruiting now and NFL draft declarations. And there are some interesting numbers, man. I mean, the transfer portal, Colorado is going to go from not even on my radar to like a top 20 roster, Mark. Okay. I mean, this is, it's wild, brother. It's wild. So we will unveil some of those numbers. I was up till 11 o'clock last night, double and triple checking. I'm thinking, man, Mark's going to bust my balls if I say this. Everybody's going to lose their minds, but those are the numbers. So I'm rolling with it. So we'll run those out. We'll roll those out next week.
Great stuff. And everyone, as you well know, we're working on our own rankings, ratings, and such throughout the off season, and we'll bring that on a regular basis. Steve, have a great rest of your week. Appreciate you being here.
You bet, brother. You too. Thank you. Go Blue.
And for everybody else out there, we will join you soon here. Let's see, on Friday, we've got a West Virginia live show at 8 o'clock Eastern time, and that's our next live edition. And we will see you with continued college football content here every day.